We see our most activist judges that we lose to every single day are, without a doubt, nothing more than an extension of the partisan arm of which they came from. There's a lot of ways that we can work within that to get some of our cases where we want them to be, where we're going to have a judge that we know is going to be fair.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock now in New York. Ladies and gentlemen of the United States, that, as of this very afternoon, is expected to be your new acting attorney general. Just one of the immediate after effects of that breaking news we've been covering today. And as we've been reporting, Pam Bondi is now out as U.S. Attorney General. A shock to some, sure, but not necessarily a surprise, at least for those of us who've been following the reporting of our MS Now colleagues in recent days. So why? And why now? Bondi's 422 days on the job were a lesson in Trumpism. She fired officials who prosecuted her boss and prosecuted officials who crossed him. She gutted her agency's civil rights division and oversaw a broader generational brain drain from some of the most essential positions. To quote one former official, Bondi took a sledgehammer to the Justice Department and its workforce. Not to mention, under her leadership, the DOJ very literally hung Donald Trump's face from its headquarters. And yet, somehow, none of it appears to have been enough for Trump. Sources tell our colleague Ken Delanian that Bondi was fired largely because Trump grew dissatisfied with her inability to deliver on prosecuting his perceived enemies. But again, not for lack of trying. There was just never enough there. Which begs the question, what's the now acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, supposed to do differently? In what way can Bondi's eventual replacement go further to properly satisfy a president evidently hell-bent on political revenge? Trump may not like the answer, and perhaps the American people won't either. And that is where we start this hour. Former Chief of Staff at DHS during Trump's first term, Miles Taylor, is with us. Political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is here as well. Plus, legal analyst Barbara McQuaid. She is a former U.S. attorney, now a law professor at the University of Michigan. Tim Miller, what actually changed today?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what changed between today and yesterday. Donald Trump being frustrated with the way the presidency's going, probably. Look at his poll numbers, probably didn't help. I think that what actually happened today was an accumulation of frustration that's been leaking out into the public for a while, that Donald Trump has had with his attorney general. And it's kind of crazy to frame it up like this, but this is just the truth, and we live in crazy times. Pam Bondi has been... I had Susan Glasser of The New Yorker on the podcast this morning. She said she's been the most corrupt attorney general of all time, including John Mitchell, Nixon's attorney general, who went to jail. And so Donald Trump looked at that and decided that she wasn't being corrupt enough for him, or she wasn't as successful or effective in her corruption as he wanted her to be. And there was a lot of frustration around the MAGA media and with Trump himself and in his inner circle that the so-called enemies list that Miles, my co-panelist, is on, and many others are on, that all of those enemies are still walking free, and that none of them had to deal with the type of legal challenges that Donald Trump had to deal with because of the crimes that he committed. And I think Donald Trump wanted his opponents to have to sit through courtrooms like he did. They haven't for the most part, or when they have, those have been very short stints and the trials have been dismissed. And he's mad that Pam Bondi hasn't been more effective at doing that. And I think all of the other complaints about her are on the periphery. I think if you just look at the people who are reporting the closest to the White House, you see that Trump's frustration with her for not going after his enemies effectively enough is the real reason that she's out.
Miles Taylor, since your name was invoked, we've talked about response today from folks inside DOJ, inside FBI, the Epstein survivors. Your reaction as someone who has gone toe-to-toe with this DOJ and this AG?
Well, first I'm going to say this. I'm glad that you opened with that banner, Alicia, because my response to your question is to point to that banner of Trump's face that now hangs outside the Justice Department. And we posted a video yesterday on defiance.org that shows what is going to happen to that banner right there on January 21st, 2029. Is folks are going to get hoisted up there on construction equipment with hedge trimmers, and they are going to chop that thing down to a cheering crowd in the streets that are going to keep scraps of it as little mementos of the time we almost lost our democracy. That is what's ultimately going to happen. But there's a couple years between now and then. And I think it's pretty shocking that we're talking about what Tim just said about whether we're going to get, more or less revenge from the next attorney general. I think it's so scary that we're in that conversation. I mean, Americans watching this are realizing how screwed up it is that we're measuring the levels of revenge that different Trump AGs and acting AGs might give us. There should be no political revenge from the Justice Department, none. And as Barb McQuade can attest to, because she's an award-winning lawyer, anytime that you carry out a federal investigation for the purpose of a political vendetta, that act in and of itself is a crime. It's illegal to selectively and vindictively prosecute people, yet this administration has made it policy.
I want to return, Barbara, to the point that Tim made about this AG being the most corrupt AG in American history. What does accountability then look like?
Well, I think that first, we may see some challenges to her bar license in Florida. We've seen so far Florida bar authorities say they don't investigate sitting government officials. If she's no longer a sitting government official, I think she could see some problems with that. And I do want to just take a moment to think about the breathtaking sweep of what she has done that is so at odds with DOJ norms to refrain from using partisan politics in making charging decisions. She oversaw efforts to charge members of Congress for making a video correctly stating the law. She sought to investigate Tim Walz and Jacob Frey in Minnesota when they encouraged people to engage in peaceful protest. There's reporting that she oversaw the investigation of Jerome Powell when he refused to reduce interest rates. There is reporting that there were efforts to indict Jim Comey and Letitia James. We've seen again and again the use of the machinery of the Justice Department to go after Donald Trump's enemies. And so I think there will be some accountability for her in that regard. I don't think this Justice Department is going to do anything about her. Perhaps we could see some civil lawsuits filed, but perhaps bar authorities may make it difficult for her to continue to practice law elsewhere.
So just to put a finer point on it, is there any criminal liability here?
I don't think so. I mean, abusing the Justice Department system is certainly something that is a violation of norms. It could even result in a civil lawsuit, I suppose, to the extent that she relied on fabricated information. There could potentially be obstruction of justice charges criminally. I don't know, though, that they relied on fabricated information. I think that they presented evidence to grand juries with a spin to suggest it was criminal behavior. But as we saw, many grand juries refused to indict. And even the ones that did, for example, when Jim Comey was indicted, we learned later that Lindsay Halligan had engaged in some alleged misconduct before the grand jury by representing that they had additional evidence that was not presented to the grand jury, and that Jim Comey would have his opportunity to tell his side of the story at trial, which of course would violate his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. So perhaps some attorney misconduct. I don't know that it arises to the level of criminal misconduct, but certainly the kinds of things that could get someone disciplined or even disbarred in the state where they have their law license.